Hey everybody, it's your boy, and today's video is going to be about another observation, and this is that some people, despite all the years of being involved in the culture war, no matter how well read they are, no matter how intelligent they are, they always seem to miss key information about the origins of this culture war. These people just seem to be stuck in this permanent state of just ignorance and surprise that when the left does something, they go, oh, how could they do this before? They did this and now they're doing this? This is crazy. What's become of them? When actually, all you need to do is to read one history book, anything about the 20th century or even the 19th century, and you'll find that nothing has changed in the last 150 years. They have been the exact same. And yet these people don't realise that. The most common example is to do with feminism. There are still people, a lot of them, to this day who think that modern feminism is some new aberration and that essentially it is a bastardised version. It is not true feminism. Yet all you have to do is look back 50 years ago and see that they were already doing this stuff before. My prime example of this is their treatment of Erin Pizzey, who used to be, I guess, quote unquote, a feminist. She set up the first domestic violence shelter in the UK, possibly even the West. She created the model for that. And then when she found out, because she couldn't help but study the phenomenon, let alone help women out, she discovered that it's reciprocal and therefore realised that men needed their own spaces and that kids weren't necessarily safer with the mother. And so she realised that it's not always the man who's starting it, sometimes it's the woman, and decided to publish these findings and to start her own male domestic violence shelter, which she did. Lo and behold, the feminists were outraged, and what did they do? Well, they forced her into hiding for many years. She was really out of the public eye for decades. They took over her female shelter and from there created $1 million business, and coupled with a lot of their newfound influence, setting up things like the Duluth model and things like that, they essentially took that over. Men would continue to struggle to find any kind of shelter and they would always be deemed as the perpetrators, not the victims, and this woman would be largely forgotten for years. It was only until relatively recently that she finally began to get at least some credit from outsider circles, from the fringe, which is me and you, essentially. So when you see people like James Lindsay, who should know better because he's been in the university system for God knows how long, wondering about why feminists attack women and why they now have a different idea of what a woman is, well, he's being ignorant. He's not clearly done the reading, because intersectionalism is 50 years old. In fact, technically it's even older than that, because it doesn't actually have its origins necessarily in 20th century feminism, the second or third wave, but before that in the 50s with a certain psychologist called John Money. Look it up if you have the stomach for it. And they have no gall about attacking women. All you have to see is the slow demonisation over decades of the housewife. The housewife was once just seen as one of many things that women did. Obviously, in certain decades, they were expected to become that. And to be honest, women wanted to anyway. The big myth is that they were forced. And that was slowly but surely demonised by these people who wanted women in the workplace for God knows what reason, it depends. Is that not attacking women? Is that not demonising the role of motherhood even? And these are women that are supposed to be really into the female form and the female role and to expanding their horizons and to protecting them, and yet they demonise this subset because they're deemed to be submissive to men. This is why the term internalised misogyny was coined, to attack people like housewives. And then we have to go back even further than that into the 1900s and the 1910s, specifically World War I, where feminists, although not all of them, for example, Sylvia Pankhurst was a die-hard pacifist till she died, but her sisters and a lot of other people across Europe, but her sisters and other feminists throughout Europe and America were not pacifists. And what did they do in Britain at least? They created the White Feather Campaign. And what was the White Feather Campaign? It was an organised humiliation campaign where men who were not in uniform or were not seen as being soldiers were given white feathers so that they were shamed into signing up, going out there and fighting for their country, or rather fighting for these women, because these women had no expectations of going out into the trenches and fighting. There were women who were obviously in the war, who were nurses or worked as nuns or with the chaplains, etc., etc., doing behind the scenes work, and some of them were even working in the factories, the mainly working class women who always worked in factories regardless. But these middle class to upper class women who had a vested interest in politics and things like that, who had links to the people who caused the war in the first place, were lecturing these working class men who couldn't even vote, because remember, 1/3 of men in World War I in Britain could not vote. These were lecturing these people. These were being shamed by these feminists to go out and fight for them. And hundreds of thousands died as a result of this. In fact, there was one story where a soldier just happened to be on leave because, believe it or not, British soldiers had a lot of leave. He was just minding his own business in his civilian attire, and one feminist, one suffragette, had the gall to give him a white feather. Of course, there's the other things that people are ignorant about, like the behaviour of the left and how they used to be, for the common man, they used to be more civilised than they once were. Yet all you have to look at is Jeremy Corbyn from the 80s and other fringe groups, and even people who were linked to the Labour Party even back then, who were really sad that Thatcher wasn't blown up by the IRA. So when people see in Manchester Labour supporters saying it was a damn shame or something, you may have seen this banner where they were saying, oh, it's such a shame that the Tories didn't get blown up. That's where that comes from. Leftist intellectuals like Virginia Woolf or George Bernard Shaw had a known contempt for the masses, yet these were the people they were meant to be supporting, who they were meant to be fighting for and speaking on behalf of. And yet they had a massive contempt for them. And yet people are totally ignorant of these things, and it baffles me because they really should be doing the reading. They should really be looking into the causes of all of this and how the left actually operate throughout history, and they'll find that really nothing has changed. Cancel culture? That's literally nothing new. That comes from the struggle sessions from Maoist China, and even in the West, such things were taking place, albeit within more communist circles. It had yet to reach the wider culture, where they were literally purging each other and trying to purity spiral. You can see that in Hollywood. Watch Razorfist's videos on how Hollywood was always red and how they were literally attacking each other and even other people who weren't necessarily communists. None of this is new. People had their careers ruined, people had their lives ruined by these people as far back as the 1930s and 40s. I can only speculate as to why people would think these things. I think for most of them, they've just recently come out of the left, or they are centre-left themselves, and they're still scratching their heads as to how all the people who they used to be friends with, all these people they used to respect, suddenly become these monsters and start doing the very things that they thought they would be against. When, of course, as we know, if you even just read Hegel, which influenced a lot of leftism, you'll find that contradictions and hypocrisy is part of the thing. They enjoy that because it confuses people. They're still in that blue-pilled mindset where the left was once a force for good, but yet was taken over by people somewhere, somehow, and had its aims and its goals subverted in the name of what exactly? Even though all you have to do is look over the past 150 years and see that the goal hasn't changed. They're still for totalitarianism, they're still against liberty, and they still did the exact same things then as they do now. Maybe these people just can't see it as it actually is. They don't want to see it as it actually is, because that would come to the horrible conclusion that these well-meaning people, because a lot of them are well-meaning, are in some way messed up and don't see them as human. That they believe such murderous that they've always believed such murderous ideologies. All these things were always there, they just didn't notice it or ignored it because they thought it was a fringe, but when actually it isn't. Or maybe they are just genuinely ignorant and have yet to truly wake up. Because there are a lot of people, less so from my era, I guess you could say, from like 2013, 2014, mainly the people from 2016 who got red pilled during Donald Trump's election, who still think that all this happened in 2016, that all of this just appeared out of nowhere, and just assume that if they just concentrate on attacking the SJWs, if they concentrate on beating the Democratic Party or the Labour Party, that everything will be fine and dandy and hunky-dory, and we can all go home and play our video games, and freedom will be saved once more. When actually, no. That's not how this works. This is not how politics works. It's completely different. All of this has been long in the making since at least the 1950s, if not longer, in the 1930s. This has been a long-term project by leftists, in the West at least, for God knows how long, before most of us were even born. Yes, throughout the decades, the left had many different forms, but the end goal was always that utopia, that communist utopia, whether that be a workers' paradise, pre-1950s, or now as a weird, messed up sexual paradise, which still would have the workers, but I guess they're not necessarily the white European workers that they used to be so heavily for. Once these people realise that none of this is new and that is actually always been the end goal, then the sooner they will realise that liberty can't just be left on its own. It has to be defended every single day. Even when we live in a time where liberty might be at its highest, it still needs defending because of the way human nature is, where we can be collectivist and irrational, have a tendency towards authoritarianism. This is why liberty needs to be defended, because the people who take advantage of those bad traits and do very well in neutering the good traits, which is the individualist side of things, the more liberty side of things, will always be there. Once these people realise that there is no slacking, we can't just relax. We always have to be vigilant, then they will never get the freedom they want. They will always be far behind. And this is why the right wing has always failed, because they've never got that into their heads. But anyway, I don't know, I'm just rambling now. Basically, for those of you who are like that, those people who think that, oh, you know, it's still 2015, or no, 2016 was a turning point, was when everything changed, learn that this is a many-headed hydra, and that chopping off one head will do no good because it will simply regrow that head. And also learn that none of this is new, and that you need a firm grasp of the history, and basically try to learn from it to prevent this from happening ever again. Really, that's all I can say. I also will be appearing at No Moss in Manchester on the 23rd of October to do a speech, so I look forward to seeing you all there, and until next time, it's been your boy, and I'll see you all later.